Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey friends, you're watching BrainStormAcres. I'm Henry.
And I'm Irene.
Today we're going to give you episode 4 of our series on canning and food safety, and in fact, all of food preservation.
Right. Now, if you remember, food spoilage in the home is normally caused either by molds, which includes mildews, bacteria. Oh, yes, I knew I was forgetting something. Yeast. That's what it was. Yes, yeast.
Although some yeast is good, some mold is good under the right circumstances.
Right. It's learning to understand what's good, what's not, and when to control it and how to control it.
The reason why you're concerned about those things is there's ways of controlling each one of them.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about food safety, especially in the context of canning, you control it by temperature. You control it by acidity,
Mm-hmm.
and you control it with no air or low oxygen.
Right. Also sugar and salt.
So, that's kind of a quick refresher about what we've been talking about for the past 3 episodes. We're going to talk about a couple of more bacteria. The first one that probably everybody's heard about is E. coli.
Escherichia coli. Yes, I can spell that. I thought about that last night. I was like, felt like a spelling bee, you know.
It is a spelling bee. Well, there's a whole bunch of different strains of E. coli. Most of them are benign. They're not going to hurt you. But there are some that are pretty bad, especially if you're young or if you have a compromised immune system.
Right. Basically, E. coli are found in the digestive tracts of every mammal that I'm aware of, and probably lots of other critters out there. It's an integral part of the digestive system process. So I remember our lake being closed when we were in college because people had been dumping Easter ducks there, and the whole lake got full of duck shift and
Shifty ducks.
shifty ducks. And they actually had to close it and figure out how to get rid of the ducks because they were polluting the lake.
Now, taking care of E. coli, if it's your food from your garden, is pretty easy. Wash your hands, rinse your vegetables, don't spread manure all over the place. At least don't spread untreated manure.
Right.
Treated manure or manure that is put directly into the soil and covered up and lay fallow for a while is usually just fine. When you get into trouble is when you try to use something that's fresh.
Right. People do use fresh rabbit, and I've never heard about any problem with that. But again, you know there's got to be some E. coli in there because they're a mammal.
So really the story for E. coli is
Wash it.
and wash your hands,
Right.
wash your arms, take normal food precautions when you're
Right.
dealing with. Now, if you get food from a grocery store, if you get carrots or potatoes, beans, peas, things like that, you can safely can those products,
Yeah.
even if there might be some E. coli in the mix.
Right. Well, the bacteria is killed off at what, 114 degrees, 140 degrees?
Between 140 and 190
Right.
degrees will kill pretty much all bacteria. Now, it won't kill bacteria spores. So
No.
things that go into hibernation and create spores
Like botulism.
are a problem.
Right.
And we'll talk about why and how to deal with them in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So E. coli is kind of the big one. You hear about that on the news relatively frequently. The reason why the FDA will put out voluntary food recalls, except when there's a specific strain of E. coli, is because it's just get the stuff that's dirty out of the food
Right.
chain. It makes it a lot safer that way. Now, there are a couple of specific strains that you'll read about that are dangerous, and those are the ones that they actually give a specific, you must recall this food.
Right. Right. You know, for most people, if you're cooking it, where you get in trouble is when you're eating it raw. If you're cooking it, the heat will kill most everything, whether it's in meat or and it'll kill parasites in meat too and things like that too. So that takes care of everything. But if you like your steak raw or rare, if you're eating steak tartare, if you're eating... Sushi is treated differently. Sushi is frozen. Properly handled sushi, like the maguro and stuff like that, the tuna that is raw, that is flash frozen.
And it's kept cold. Usually it's kept below 3 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 2 days.
Right.
Or it's below 30 below for 15 hours. So that's one way that those kinds of parasites can be killed.
Right. So that takes care of the parasites and things that you'd get in that. You know, the conscientious butchers at the stores will switch between different types of controls in terms of cleaners and things like that. The meat can come in pre-infected. Count on things like chlorine washers and stuff like that to kill it. Well, if you've ever hosed down, say you get some junk, dirt on your patio, and you hit it with a hose. Okay, once in a while, it gets every teeny tiny speck off there in one fell swoop.
But sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, most of the time you have to kind of go around like this, you know. And that means if the mechanical washer just happens to miss a spot.
It missed the spot and it missed whatever was there.
Exactly. So one of the reasons a lot of people like to butcher their own meat, or at least buy it from people who are conscientious butcherers, is the fact that you know that the intestinal tract was handled correctly. Now, if you're dealing with chitlins and things like that, that's a whole other can of worms that I'm not even going to go for.
Well, the bottom line of all of this is that, for the most part, all of these bacteria are easy to deal with.
Yes.
All you need to do is get them hot enough, long enough, and the actual physical processes they denature. Now, all that means is that the proteins that would cause problems for you are made to rip apart.
Right.
And that's a good thing.
Right.
Now, keep in mind, it doesn't get rid of the spores. And that's why when you look at the CDC and FDA guidelines for home canning, they will always tell you, acidify the food.
Right. Or it has to be pressure canned.
Now,
because pressure canning above
240 degrees
Fahrenheit, yeah.
Now, when you water bath can at sea level, you're only getting the water to 212 degrees, and
Right.
that will kill off a certain amount of...
That'll take care of your molds, your mildews, your yeasts, and
your live bacteria.
a lot of your bacterias.
Now, it won't take care of the spores. Again, it won't take care of the spores.
They're still there.
If you have high acid food, the spores can't erupt forth and create more bacteria.
Right.
That's what makes that kind of canning safe.
Right. And if you live at high altitude like we do, our water does not boil at 212. It boils at 210.
Which is one of the reasons why our canning schedules are longer. When we water bath can, it's about 10 minutes longer for most things.
10 to 15, depending on the size of the jar.
For pressure canning, it's not a problem.
No, we use the same length of canning, but we use a full 15 pounds of pressure to achieve the correct altitude. And there's got to be a limitation to that. I'm sure that at some point you can't can without special equipment because, if you're going to can on top of Mount Everest, it's too tall.
It is.
Not that I can imagine hauling a canner up to Mount Everest. And it's easy enough to find out what your altitude is. You can go to the Google monster and you can, ask it. Most cities will have, such and such a town, 375 feet above sea level or whatever it is.
Flagstaff, Arizona, 7,400 feet.
Exactly. If you go to Google and ask what the altitude of your town is, but you have to be aware of where you are in comparison to your town. We've used other means, including a GPS, to actually discern exactly what our altitude is.
Well, the bottom line for us is we're above 1,000 feet above sea level, which means that we have to go to the higher pressure canning schedule. That's it. That's the end of that story.
Right. And the longer water bath canning schedule. And if you go to something like a Ball Blue Book or something, it's got a nice, neat little chart in there. You figure out what your altitude is. You look at the altitude. And you see if you need to add anything. Because like 0 to 100 to 1,000, I think, is just plain sea level as far as they're concerned. But after that, it becomes different.
Yeah, the reason for that actually is as you go higher up, the atmosphere gets to be thinner. And the reason why that is because, strangely enough, the gravity attraction goes down, which means that you have less pressure. Since you have less pressure from the atmosphere, the water is going to boil at a lower temperature.
Right.
That's a bit of geeky math, but that's it for today.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's why when you go to high altitude and you are from sea level, you're huffing and puffing. It's because there's not as much air up there.
So let's talk a little bit about canning schedules and why they are the length that they are and how they actually work. It's really pretty simple. When the FDA and the CDC, in fact, it's mostly the FDA and its associated food scientists, put out a schedule, it's because they do a challenge test. Now, the challenge test is done by using a packet of bacteria. Now, this is not to actually sell the food or give the food away. It's just not going to be eaten at all. But what they do is they'll use a specific bacteria count in a packet. They'll put that into the food, and they'll can the food for an amount of time, and then they'll look to see how many bacteria are still alive. Mm-hmm. That's how they develop that time schedule.
Right. That's why you have expiration dates on your food, because the concern is that if you have, say, a can of beans from the grocery store, and it's now 5 years past its best use-by date, it hasn't swollen. But there's two types of infection in cans. One is what they call the swell thing, where you really can see the can is swollen, it's leaking, it's you know. And then there's what they call the flat infection, where it doesn't actually make anything expand. But what can happen is if you have surviving bacteria or mold in there, it will drop. It will cause the acidity level to drop. And now, remember, that acid is what protects you from the cooties, and all of a sudden you've got low acid, so now the cooties can grow in there. And that's one of the reasons that you have the best use-by date on products, is because it's not just the quality, although the quality will go down too. I mean, I've had stuff that it was mushy. It just, you know, and it wasn't that much past its best use-by date. The problem is they make very conservative dates. The reason they make conservative dates is they cannot guarantee how that can was held.
So, kind of summarize where we are so far in the series. Number one, the real food spoilage issues when you can is mold, yeast, and bacteria. All three of those are easily managed by having sufficient acidity, sufficient canning time, and sufficient cleanliness and care when you do the canning.
Right, and the heat wipes out the enzymes too, which is the other main source of quality loss.
So it's really that simple.
Mm-hmm.
Next episode, we're going to talk about rogue canning. Thanks very much for watching. We'll talk with you later.
Bye.
Bye.